I'm Brian Sommer, and I'm going to knock through a lot of material real quickly in the next 15 minutes or so. But I want to talk about some of the implications of the new technologies that are out there and help put a framework for you in separating the hype from the reality. And if you do that well, you're going to help guide your firm, I think, to stay on the correct side of some of the new digital technologies that are coming out. So let's get right into it. There's a lot of new stuff popping up every single day, and these are just some of the technologies, and you can actually see a number of these products being demonstrated in some of these technologies being demonstrated in some of the new applications that are out on the exhibition floor. There's a great resource that many of you ought to find. John Sumser is a colleague. He's another industry analyst. He has written this incredible book on an ebook on all the new artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies in HR. If you can get your hands on a copy of it, I think you'll find it highly informative. I think some of the couple of paragraphs I put on this slide are also very interesting to note. That he's pointing out that 80% of the technology out there right now in AI for HR is in the recruiting area, and I don't disagree with that. There's been a lot of talk over the years about flight risk analysis and using machine learning to indicate who's at risk for that. But recruiting is where I know a lot of the vendors are focused on. The problem with a lot of this is that there's a lot of hope, but not a lot of real hard science on some of this, and we've got to be very careful about it. But John's book is really a great one, and I have no problem at all recommending someone who's in a colleague but a competing firm that you chase down that resource. The recruiting automation space is really changing. Here are just some of the names of some of the products that I often run into. This slide actually comes from Intello, and Intello is a company that has a big data store of approximately 1 billion profiles of people from all over the world. I point that out because it is bringing a huge amount of change into the market, and there's just so many new companies, and they're not the usual suspects that you guys know. When I ask clients, what is it you're trying to look at, I often get some kind of definition of, well, we want to modernize things. It's either modernize some of the HR processes, or maybe they want to reimagine them. But what they often are telling me is, well, I think I want to do an upgraded ERP project, or I might want to do some kind of digital transformation, or we're going to introduce some kind of new business models in the company. And there are clearly HR ramifications on all of those. The problem is, if you don't know what problem you're going to solve, you don't know really how to evaluate these different technologies. I suggest you look at a two-part kind of review in evaluating these products. The first is to separate the products into one of three different buckets. They're either incremental improvements over an existing HR product. You'll often find that with a lot of the old school HR vendors, and they're trying to add incremental technologies around the periphery of an old product line. There's another group that are selling what I call hyperbolic solutions. These are products that come with huge amount of hype and promise, but they're really short usually on a lot of very hard science to back them up and proof. The value proposition could be a bit elusive, or maybe what you don't see is how much work it takes to actually make these things viable. For example, one incredible technology that I saw at a show was being demonstrated in a matter of about 2 minutes by the CEO of a software company. He got a standing ovation. It was so impressive. But I was backstage, and when he came back, I asked him to open up his laptop and show me the software code behind that one little demo that he did. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of very specific code just to make that one little demonstration work. It was fabulous to see. It is not commercially viable. And I tell you, you may have to look under the covers to see what's really good and what's not. Anyway, if you do this first cut, just to bucket things into three different categories, then you want to do a deeper cut subsequent to find out which ones of them are going to work, which ones of the following in a given niche are going to be the ones you're going to go with. So in the first cut, these are those three categories I was talking about. The traditional vendors are just slapping something onto the side of an old product. And what's dangerous about those products is it's like putting, the expression we use in the US is it's like putting lipstick on a pig. It's the same old thing, the old data model, the old constraints, just with a little new window dressing put on it. The fad products, there's a lot of them out there right now. I'm not saying all engagement products are faddish. I'm not saying all of the ones that deal with culture are a problem, and same thing with natural language processing and the like. But a lot of those, frankly, are long on hope, short on real viable statistics. And I'm going to get into, I hope, and again, I want to emphasize, this isn't the deck, this is the deck I submitted, so this is an old deck of mine, so I'm hoping my other slides are in here. But the bottom line is you got those two groups, and then finally you get the ones where you got vendors who are building net new solutions. I mean, they're from the ground up, they're built on new platforms, they're running with an idea about redesigning an entire process to serve all new kinds of constituents. And they're very, very different from what anybody else has seen in the past. To do your review, though, I think you're going to have to take a look at how much effort's required to do the review of the different technologies in a given space and find out what kind of competitive advantage are any of these things going to give to your firm. The reality is that, some products that are highly transformational, I'm going to tell you, you've got to do the work to figure out what ones are really going to save you, your firm, a lot of money or give you a lot of advantage. If all you want to do is go on the market and buy a new payroll package, that's a real normal requirement or a traditional requirement that requires just the minimal amount of effort to go figure out which one you want to bring into your firm. But most of the energy today in most companies is being spent by executives who are looking for vendors with wow factor kind of applications, things that are going to differentiate their firm in the quest to solve the war for talent, for example. So the sweet spot you might want to look at is, let's measure on two other axes. How mature is the technology? Is it usable right out of the box today versus still in the very theoretical kind of state? And how bankable or how good are the results that you can get out of it? Is the science behind it solid or is it pretty iffy? And what you find, again, let's put payroll in this bottom green category. There's no real science we need. It either does calculate the payroll correctly or not. And the maturity is, it's quite usable. You can buy those out of the box today. Some of these other areas are definitely higher risk kind of places, and you got to be careful where you're at with them. There are some science issues that I think we need to talk about. I know it may be, I feel like at a show like this, I'm the guy giving tough love. I have to tell you that not everything's as rosy as maybe what you may hear out on the expo floor. I'm not trying to upset some of the vendors out there, but they do kind of blur the lines on some points. The first one, though, correlation versus causation. I can find lots of vendors who sell products that work like this. Try financial wellness. This says, the argument is, we've got a lot of people at work who are stressed out about their finances personally. And if we offer them a course that'll mitigate the stress because they can plan and budget their home finances better, and therefore that makes them more engaged with the company. And if they're more engaged with the company, that makes them more productive workers. Now, anyone who's had a programming or logic course, if you listen to me, it was like, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. Those are actually, all I'm really talking about are really just correlations. But it turns out when you really study it, you may find out that the causal factors why somebody's experiencing financial stress may have more to do with your firm. Your firm may not pay them a livable wage. Your firm may take away their work hours from week to week, and they can't plan their life with any kind of constancy. Your firm may be the causal factor. It's just correlated, differently if you want to make the study go that way. So you've got to be real clear. And in fact, just because someone is or isn't engaged may not have no effect on their productivity. I know I've worked with some people who are miserable every day they walk into work, but they do great work. And that's because I think they wake up every morning trying to think of a new way to complain about their job. But by God, they're going to be there for the next 10 years and still complaining every day about it. So be careful in confusing correlation with causation. Another problem has to do, everybody here, I'm going to assume, saw a bot demo in the last 24 hours. Pretty much everyone's seen a chat bot. And most of those have machine learning running underneath them. The question you need to ask all the vendors is, how opaque or transparent is your logic? Because if it's opaque, that means you'll never be able to see it, you can't defend it, and you can't do anything about it. You're always connected to the vendor for them to support, maintain, or better educate these machine learning tools. And you want things that are clearly transparent, not opaque. And I go through here, but I mean, there's a number of these kind of issues that need to be dealt with. Here's a couple of things to think about. Amazon, we all know them, they had a system that was being developed for recruiting. And what it was interesting, it penalized resumes that included the word women. And it did it. It looked for things like if you went to an all-women's college, the machine learning automatically moved you down in the tracking system. Now, why did it do that? Well, that's because in the old database that the machine learning was learning what they did and didn't like from candidates, somehow it picked up all this hiring bias and it amplified it in the new recruiting tool. And what did Amazon do when they found out about it? They actually killed the program because they couldn't fix the bias because it was based on a bad data set. So that's one problem. We got another one, a virtual agent like chatbots. Just because the computer recognizes the words you say, don't extrapolate from that it knows what you mean. Oh man, that is so true. I have argued with bots before. I have waged war with them on Twitter, and yet I never win. But nonetheless, they're a problem. Here's another one. There's a problem called the Hawthorne effect. This is an interesting thing to watch out for. This says that anytime like you introduce a new technology into your organization, you get this like halo effect right away because people love the new technology. It's the cool new shiny toy you want to play with. But the minute you quit showing any interest in finding out, hey, how you liking our new chatbot or whatever, then you realize like satisfaction just plummets because you're no longer studying the people who are using this technology. So watch out for the Hawthorne effect. And we also have others. This one, the Monte Carlo fallacy, it sometimes comes into play even with some of these technologies, particularly with machine learning, because just because sometimes there was a lucky streak where the same result kept coming up, a machine learning tool will actually think that is the pattern when in fact it was just a statistical anomaly that's popping up along the way. And I know you guys are probably getting bored to tears thinking, this guy's giving me a lecture on statistics or whatever, but I'm going to move off of this. The science right now, I'm going to tell you, is difficult. And if you're with a firm that has, let's say, under 1,000 employees, you may find that your firm's ability to power up and use machine learning technologies may be very limited because you'll never have enough people in the data set to give you statistically meaningful information. So some of that technology you're hearing about out there really only applies to the very largest companies. Or you have to be willing to have your data aggregated with that of other companies to get something out of it. Do what we do as industry analysts. I want you to challenge the daylights out of everything that they tell you. The vendors, they just really want your money. I mean, let's be clear about that. but you got to make them work for it, and don't just take everything on face value. Guys like me, vendors hate us because we don't believe a word until they can prove it. And I know that makes us not necessarily loved all the time, but it's part of our job. The other thing we do is we talk to real customers who use it. And I know that sounds like an obvious due diligence task, but don't buy any of these technology products or the claims until you actually talk to the customer who actually does it. Now, I know the last speaker talked about Net Promoter Scores. Let me tell you a little trick one of the vendors uses, and it's a big vendor, and you know them. You all know their name. But they love to talk about how great their customer satisfaction score is. Interestingly enough, the people that they send the customer sat study to are the economic buyers, the people that sign the contract for the software. So, and when they sold the software to an a payroll product, but it was bought by the CFO, not the chief HR officer. So the CFO gets the deal, the survey, and of course they never want to look like they ever made a bad decision, so of course they give it a 10. Whereas if they sent the survey to an actual user, they may be going like, oh God, this stuff is terrible, and would have given it a 1 or a 2. And that's how they end up with a great score, but it doesn't mean anything unless you can independently verify who it went to, who's in that population, and did you check up all of them to see how well they did it. And again, check the science behind this stuff. By the way, I've heard claims that as a vendor, the vendor will claim that if we can find who in your company has a high blood glucose level, then we can improve engagement. And I'm like, wow, there's a big leap right there to see if, and I'm still waiting for the science behind that one. For you to get going on this, I think you guys have to get very practical very quick. I think you have to figure out kind of a long-range plan as to the kinds of products you're interested in, and then you got to start doing a lot of looking at not only the individual players, but part of that looking is to identify how much of these new technologies will actually eliminate some of the non-value-added or low-value-added activities in your company. The purpose of this is to not only identify the art of what is possible, but it's also to identify where you're going to get some savings and productivity or efficiency savings in your HR organization, because when you bring these new technologies in, they require new skills from your HR people, and you may have to switch out people or retrain some of your additional staff to get it done. And that's going to require you to actually find a way to do it, because I'm not sure any HR director I've talked to can get more headcount today. So you have to be looking at where the non-value-added work is and getting that out of your system. You also need to reimagine what every HR process is going to look like. And I did a topic earlier this morning, a masterclass on that. And there was a lot of work there to kind of figure out, if I use these technologies, how does it fundamentally change how we're going to do the work in this particular area? If you get the answer to that, then you're halfway there to actually having a good chance of having a success. Again, pick the tools, get the skills required to implement them, and then start using that technology. And then you're going to have to, like using shampoo, just repeat this all the time. And the reason I say you're going to have to repeat it is because these products are coming out now with such velocity in the marketplace. And even though you may do all kinds of great due diligence trying to buy a great one today, chances are better products are going to be popping up within a year and a half or so of when you get the first one implemented. Many of you probably are used to, in your company, to having the same software for 10, 15, or 20 years. And the useful life of these new applications, particularly mobile cellular-powered products, smartphone products, can be measured now in weeks or months. The best you'll get out of some of them might be a couple of years. So frequent either upgrade or replacement cycles are going to be the norm, and you're going to have to get really good at being sharp about how you evaluate these technologies and bring new ones into your company going forward. There are some other things you might want to consider. This top one, it's a very dull thing to mention, but you want to make sure that the data model that these vendors are using is very current and relevant. Some of the products out there were all built on a similar data model that was sold by one firm for a better part of 30 years now. That's why so many HR products look the same, act the same, behave the same. It's because they have the same underlying assumptions about technology underneath it. They were designed for flat files and index sequential files and relational databases. They were never designed for a world with in-memory, unlimited technology with row and column or graph databases underneath them. It's a different world out there, and the technology should reflect that. Another thing that just always blows me away is how many products are still not global. And I mean really not global. Another colleague of mine, Ray Wang, he and I were having a bite of lunch out here earlier this afternoon with a software exec, and he was trying to convince us how great his product was. And Ray and I, frankly, we just weren't having it. And the reason we weren't was because he comes from a country where the group or collective or the government, if you will, is the most important factor in the people that live in that area. Whereas in the United States, personal liberties are number one, and government is a distant number two, and religion's even lower than that. Go to different countries around the world, in some countries you find theocracies where religion is number one. So based on just that one data point, we told him which countries his product would or wouldn't work well in based on how well it might not or might be received in different parts of the planet. But regardless of the adoption, the reality is most HR products I see are not global. Some of the GDPR requirements have really made a change in a lot of recruiting products, but other products, sad to say, don't really reflect that very well yet. And other functionality, like I'm still waiting for a single global payroll engine, but I'll probably be dead and gone before that ever shows up. Some of the other things here, I mean, you can read all these lists, but you know, I've made most of these points in one variation or another, like the don't accept the claims at face value. All these things are going to be material, and they're going to come back and impact you. I mentioned this slide earlier this morning, and I do want to use it right now. When you guys get ready to look at some of these new technologies and what's going to work for your firm, you need to do a self-assessment of your organization. For those many companies I go to, I find out the HR functions are just that, they function. There's nothing to write home about, nothing to brag about. You're hiring people, you're getting people paid, but you really don't want anybody to see how you get it done because it's not pretty. There's probably way too many spreadsheets you're still using. The interface from payroll to general ledger is still a mess and a manual process, and I could go on and on. What is fascinating to me, though, is how many companies I go talk to, when I ask them to frankly tell me where they're at, they often say that they're borderline between functional and dysfunctional. If they lose a critical resource or two, they immediately get into trouble. Or if their company does a merger or does some big kind of growth or contraction deal, they're in a world of hurt. And I point this out because not all companies are functioning well, not all of them are process excellent, and only a very few can actually do something hugely and massively transformational. So if you're going out there right now and your company's borderline dysfunctional and you're trying to get something that's going to just transform your firm, you're probably overreaching and you're not going to be successful. You need to think about moving up one step at a time, not trying to jump all the way to the top of the pyramid. And so your motivation for any of these changes as you're making one of these step changes. You're either trying to go from survival to becoming a low-cost provider and so forth. But think about that. Make sure you know the journey you're on because it will affect what you buy and how you evaluate it. So to button it up, I just want to tell you that I love to see all the innovation. In fact, you're at an interesting show because if we were doing this show and it was focused on finance, you'd be really disappointed because there's not a lot of anything interesting happening in the world of double entry accounting. About the biggest thing out there is maybe how they do budgeting and planning today using some of the new cloud stuff, but that's it. All the real fun stuff's actually here in HR. But with that, that's like having an unlimited budget and going into the world's biggest supermarket. You don't know what to buy. There's just so many options. So you got to really look at this with a very careful eye. Plan for the changes. Don't do any of this willy-nilly. And whatever you do, folks, I want you to avoid a common problem I see again and again. Lots of HR organizations buy one new application every year or two, and then as a result, they end up with what the British call a dog's breakfast of technology. You want to try and keep it down to a handful of manageable vendors and products, or you'll never keep it integrated. So with that, I may have a couple of minutes. I'm not 100% sure, but if I do, I'll take a question or two if you like. And with that, I say thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.